In a world of constant connectivity, the primary differentiator between those who survive and those who lead is the ability to transform obstacles into opportunities. Welcome back to the deep dive. I am so glad you're here, because today we are tackling the single most pervasive, exhausting, and misunderstood invisible force in our modern lives. I'm talking about stress. But not the way you're used to hearing about it. We aren't going to talk about bubble baths, or taking a sabbatical, or just breathing through it. We are going to talk about the mechanics of high performance under pressure. We are going to talk about the difference between the people who burn out and the people who, quite literally, get rich and happy while dealing with the exact same workload. I've been reading a fascinating breakdown of a methodology developed by a business psychologist who specializes in what he calls the success factor. And the premise is startlingly simple, yet difficult to execute without a map. The premise is this: in the new normal, this world of 24/7 connectivity, global competition, and constant notification pings, resilience is no longer a soft skill. It is the primary differentiator. It is the metric. In fact, 71% of senior executives now rank resilience as the top factor in deciding who to keep and who to let go. So if you feel like you are running on a treadmill that keeps speeding up, and you're just waiting to fall off the back, this conversation is for you. We're going to deconstruct the architecture of stress, look at the biology of why you feel the way you do, and most importantly, we are going to hand you a toolkit, a set of cognitive and physiological levers that you can pull in 3 minutes or less. Let's start with the landscape. The author describes our current reality as a place characterized by too much to do, too many obstacles, and too many stressed people. Sound familiar? It's the feeling of waking up already behind. But here is the first major reframe, and I want you to really sit with this. Stress management is not about passive relaxation. It isn't about escaping the work. It is about active mastery. The thesis here is that you have far more control than you realize, but you are likely looking for it in the wrong places. The book lays out a trajectory: awareness, control, action. It argues that to resolve any stressful situation, whether it's a collapsing deal, a screaming toddler, or a difficult board meeting, you have to intervene in 3 specific areas. First, perspective, how you frame the data coming in. Second, physiology, how your body is processing that data biologically. And third, the root problem, actually solving the issue so it doesn't come back to haunt you next week. Now, before we get into the heavy theory, let's ground this in reality. I want to tell you about 2 people. Let's call them archetypes, but they are based on real case studies from the book. First, meet Stacy. Stacy is a mid-level manager and a mother. If you looked at Stacy's life on paper, it looks successful. But inside, she is crumbling. She is a perfectionist. She has a to-do list with 61 items on it, 61. And she stares at it with a mix of terror and paralysis. She has an assistant who makes errors, which drives Stacy crazy, so she ends up doing the work herself. And then she goes home, exhausted, snaps at her kids, and lies awake at 3 a.m. suffering from mom guilt and insomnia. Stacy is in what the author calls survival mode. She is reactive. She is drowning. Then there's Dan. Dan is an entrepreneur, runs a financial consulting firm. Dan isn't drowning in tasks like Stacy, he's drowning in fear. He's chasing small fish, low-value clients that don't pay well, because he is too intimidated to pick up the phone and call the high-value targets. His days are reactive, interrupted by minor fires he feels he has to put out. He's stagnant. Here is why this matters. Stacy and Dan represent the 2 ways stress kills our potential. Stacy is the overwhelmed, and Dan is the frozen. The intervention for both of them wasn't work less. It was work differently. For Stacy, she learned a physiological trick to toggle her nervous system to sleep in 3 minutes. She prioritized that 61-item list down to the few things that actually moved the needle. And crucially, she learned to communicate with her assistant to stop the errors rather than just absorbing the work. The result? Promoted. Happier kids. Sleeping through the night. For Dan, it was about alignment. He had to systematize the low-value paperwork to clear his mental RAM. He used a physiological prescription, a physical act to change his chemistry, to generate courage before dialing the big clients. 3 months later, Dan isn't chasing pennies. He's landing whales and spending time with his wife. So, how do we get from Stacy and Dan to a place of mastery? We have to look at the 50% rule. This is, in my opinion, the intellectual anchor of the entire philosophy. The author opens this concept with a quote by Aldous Huxley. The only corner of the universe you can be certain of improving is your own self. Here is the hard truth. Stress is almost never caused by the external event. It is not caused by the 100th email. It is not caused by the traffic jam. It is not caused by the rude comment your boss made. Stress occurs when the demands of the situation exceed your perceived sense of control over it. It is the gap between, I have to handle this, and, I don't know if I can. Most of us have an external locus of control. We think, I am stressed because the market is down. I am stressed because my partner is messy. The book argues that this is a trap. You have to move to an internal locus of control. You have to realize that stress is your internal emergency. Emergency. Siren going off, and you are the one with the hand on the switch. Enter the 50% rule. Imagine every conflict, every deadline, every interaction is a pie chart. Half of that pie, 50%, is completely outside your control. This includes market trends, the weather, technology failing, and most importantly, other people. You cannot control what your boss thinks. You cannot control if a client ghosts you. You cannot control if your spouse had a bad day at work. That is the uncontrollable 50%. The other half, your 50%, is yours. This is your perspective, your preparation, your tone of voice, your physiological state, and your specific actions. Here is the definition of success in this model. Success is taking 100% responsibility for your 50% of the interaction, and letting the rest go. Survival mode, where most of us live, is trying to control the other person's 50% while neglecting our own. Let's look at a case study of this, Vicky. Vicky had a yeller boss. A guy who would just verbally assault people in meetings. Most people in Vicky's position would try to change the boss, impossible, or complain to HR, often ineffective, or just go home and cry, destructive. Vicky applied the 50% rule. She realized she couldn't control his volume, or his temper. That's his 50%. So what was her 50%? She could control her physical reaction. She used breathing techniques to keep her heart rate down so she didn't enter fight or flight. She rehearsed her presentations so she was bulletproof on the facts. She aligned her proposals with what she knew motivated him. She didn't try to fix him, she mastered herself. The result? She became the only person he respected. She got promoted to lead a new unit. She didn't just survive the predator, she tamed the environment. Now I know what you're thinking. I can hear the objection forming in your mind right now. That sounds great, but what if I do my 50% perfectly, and the other person, let's call him Kyle, is still a disaster? What if Kyle does nothing? The author calls this the Kyle problem. And the answer is profound. First, your 50% is your reputation. When you are in a conflict, observers, your team, your kids, your board of directors, are not just judging the provocation. They are judging your reaction. If you maintain your composure and professionalism while Kyle is losing his mind, you win the war of reputation. Second, and this is the one that really hit me, clarity. If you consistently execute your 50%, you communicate clearly, you set boundaries, you deliver excellence, and the situation does not improve. You now have perfect data. You know that the problem is not you. You know that the situation is unfixable. This gives you the clarity to leave. It allows you to exit a toxic relationship or a bad job without the lingering what if or self-doubt. You walk away knowing you did your part. That is the end of chronic, self-created stress. Let's pivot a bit to how we diagnose ourselves. The book offers a fascinating self-assessment that contrasts success traits with survival traits. It's worth asking yourself where you fall on this spectrum right now. In terms of work-life balance, do you view balance as active solution-seeking? Or do you view it through the lens of guilt? Do you feel trapped? In terms of motivation, when something goes wrong, do you get curious? Do you engage socially? Or do you withdraw, get irritable, and assume the setback is a personal attack? In terms of interpersonal dynamics, this is a big one. When dealing with difficult people, does the success mindset act to get cooperation? Or does the survival mindset just go home and complain about them, hoping they will magically change? The author talks about the warning bell. We all have one. It's that moment you slip from success to survival. Maybe it's an internal monologue that says, "I don't have time to work out this week." That's a lie, by the way. It's a priority shift based on stress. Maybe it's a behavioral shift. You start reaching for a glass of wine on Tuesday night when you usually don't. Or you start staying late at the office just to look busy. These are the canaries in the coal mine. When you hear the bell, you have to intervene. But how? How do we intervene when the stakes are high and the system is broken? This brings us to one of the most counterintuitive and brilliant concepts in the book: healthy apathy. Now, apathy is usually a dirty word. We are told to care. We are told to be passionate. But the author argues for a specific type of professional detachment, especially for those in large, slow-moving bureaucracies or toxic environments. He calls it being a passionate but detached reformer. Let's look at Amita. Amita was a senior government leader. She was brilliant, but she was burning out because every policy recommendation she made was blocked by politics. She was taking it personally. She felt like a failure because the outcome wasn't what she wanted. She had to learn healthy apathy. This means you continue to contribute your absolute best work, that is your 50%. You are passionate about the input. You are passionate about the quality of your report. But you emotionally detach from the result. You accept the natural order of timing. You accept that there are variables you cannot see. You define your boundaries. By doing this, Amita could sit in a meeting, present a world-class idea, watch it get shot down for political reasons, and walk out of the room with her blood pressure unchanged. She didn't stop caring about the work, she stopped tying her self-worth to the organization's acceptance of the work. That is a superpower. That is how you survive in a broken system without becoming broken yourself. Now we have to go deeper. We've talked about the mind, but we are biological machines. The book quotes the neuroanatomist Jill Bolte Taylor, who famously said, "We are not thinking creatures who feel, we are feeling creatures who think." This is crucial. You cannot think your way out of stress if your body is in a state of physiological panic. The author introduces the SCARF model, developed by David Rock. It explains that the human brain treats social threats with the exact same intensity as physical threats. If a tiger jumps at you, your brain lights up. If your boss undermines you in a meeting, the exact same part of the brain lights up. SCARF stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Think about it. Status. Did that email make me look stupid? Certainty. Is my company going to restructure again? Autonomy. Why is my manager micromanaging me? Relatedness. Why wasn't I invited to that lunch? Fairness. Why did he get the bonus and I didn't? These aren't just feelings. These are neurobiological triggers. When one of these is threatened, your body dumps cortisol and adrenaline into your system. You enter the sympathetic nervous system, SNS, the fight or flight mode. The problem is the new normal we talked about at the beginning keeps us in the SNS all day long. We are stuck with the gas pedal floored. We never engage the parasympathetic nervous system, PNS, the rest and digest brake pedal. This is why the author talks about the sprint recovery model. We are not marathon runners. We are meant to sprint and then recover. Sprint and recover. But we have forgotten how to recover. We think recovery is sleeping at night, but if you go to bed flooded with cortisol, you aren't recovering, you're just unconscious. This is where the 3-minute promise comes in. The book suggests we need to manually toggle our systems. You can use deep breathing, specific physical movements, or even gratitude exercises to force the body from SNS to PNS. You have to signal to your primitive brain, the tiger is gone. You are safe. If you don't do this physically, no amount of positive thinking will work. So, we have the 50% rule for our minds, and the sprint recovery model for our bodies. We have healthy apathy for our careers. How do we pull this all together into something you can do tomorrow? The book concludes this section with a practical exercise called the ideal day. It sounds simple, but I want you to actually do this. Step 1. Write a detailed description of your ideal day. Not a vacation day in Hawaii. A work day. In a perfect world, how do you wake up? How do you feel? How do you handle that first email? When do you take a break? How do you interact with your team? Step 2. Write down your current typical day. Be honest. The rushing, the caffeine jitters, the resentment, the exhaustion. Step 3. Look at the gap. The ideal day is your roadmap. You will never hit it perfectly every time. Remember, the uncontrollable 50% will always throw curveballs. But the goal is to use your agency to steer toward that vision. If your ideal day involves deep work in the morning, but your typical day is full of meetings, your 50% action is to block your calendar or negotiate meeting times. If your ideal day involves leaving at 5 p.m. to see your kids, but your typical day has you staying until 7, your 50% action is to set a hard boundary and manage expectations. The core message of this book, and of this deep dive today, is that you are not a victim of your circumstances. You are not a victim of the new normal. You are an agent. You have agency. It is easy to look at the world, the economy, the demands, the noise, and feel small. It is easy to slip into survival mode, where we just keep our heads down and hope we don't get hit. But the successful, the resilient, the people who thrive? They look at the chaos, they draw a line in the sand, and they say, that part over there is the storm. I can't stop the storm. But this part here? This is my ship. And I am the captain of my ship. So, my challenge to you this week is this: identify one stressor. Just one. Apply the 50% rule. Draw the circle. What is them? What is you? Let go of them. Master you. And see what happens to the noise. As always, thank you for listening. Take care of your nervous system, take care of your 50%, and I'll see you in the next episode.